Story 1. The Shadow That Follows. I'm Eleanor Vance, a 30-year-old graphic designer who recently moved into an old rented apartment on the outskirts of Salem, Massachusetts in early 2018. I left Boston after a painful breakup and needed a fresh start. A quieter place to heal. Salem is famous for its witch history and spooky tales, but I'm a realist. I thought they were just rumors. However, I'm also quite an introvert, prone to anxiety when alone, especially at night. My apartment was in a quiet neighborhood, with old wooden houses and small, silent cobblestone streets. I usually worked late at home, and on nights I had to go out for groceries or take a short walk for fresh air. The streets in my neighborhood were usually deserted. Dim yellow streetlights cast weak illumination on the old trees. I loved this quiet atmosphere. It helped me escape the noise in my head. One chilly March evening, around 11 p.m., I walked to the convenience store a few blocks from my place. The air was silent. Only the sound of wind rustling through dry leaves and my own footsteps echoing on the sidewalk. As I walked past a deserted stretch of road, I suddenly heard another sound. Footsteps. They were steady, light, but clearly not my own. They echoed right behind me. I glanced over my shoulder. There was no one there. I kept walking, and the footsteps kept pace. I stopped abruptly, turning completely around. The road was still empty. Not a soul in sight, not a single car. Only the cold wind whistling through. I must be tired, I told myself, trying to reassure myself. I started walking again, this time intentionally picking up my pace a bit. The footsteps behind me also quickened. They didn't match my rhythm, but always maintained a certain distance. Like an invisible shadow clinging to me. A sudden coldness washed over me, colder than the chill of a March night. The hairs on my arms stood on end. I felt like someone was standing right behind me, though I couldn't see them. Fear began to creep into my mind. I sped up, almost running, and the invisible footsteps also accelerated, relentlessly. When I was only a few blocks from my apartment, the footsteps behind me became more urgent, almost touching my heels. My heart pounded in my chest. I didn't dare turn around again. Just ran for my life. Just then, as I ran past the dim street light illuminating from an old lamppost, I caught a fleeting glimpse of a shadow. A pitch black, tall and thin shadow, darting incredibly fast into a small alleyway beside the road, disappearing instantly. It didn't seem like an ordinary person. It was too thin, too fast, and made no sound at all as it vanished into the darkness. I stopped abruptly, gasping for breath, the salty taste of sweat and fear lingering on my lips. The alley was pitch black. Not a sound. Could that have been the one who was following me? But the way it moved, unnaturally. I stood there for a moment, trying to calm down, telling myself it was just an illusion due to fatigue or some animal running by. I continued walking home, each step heavy. On high alert, my apartment appeared ahead, like a lifeline. I quickly unlocked the door, rushed inside, slammed the door shut and locked all the bolts. I leaned against the door, panting, the cold sensation still lingering. The dark house no longer provided a complete sense of security. I still felt like unseen eyes were watching from outside my living room window. That night, I couldn't sleep a wink. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured the tall, thin black shadow darting past the streetlight and the invisible footsteps chasing me. I tossed and turned, listening to every small sound inside and outside the apartment. Always feeling uneasy. as if something unusual was lurking just outside. In the following days, the fear from the deserted road began to seep into my own apartment. I still frequently felt uneasy whenever I was alone at night. Sometimes, when I was sitting and working or reading in the living room, I would hear small, unidentifiable noises, the old wooden floorboards creaking in the dark hallway, as if someone was walking there, a clinking sound from the kitchen, as if a glass had just been gently nudged. I always rushed to check, but everything was in its proper place. A few times, I discovered small objects in the house moved inexplicably. My car keys, which I usually left on the hook by the door, would suddenly be on the floor, right beneath the hook. The book I was reading by my bedside table would fall to the ground. I carefully picked them up, trying to find a logical explanation, but couldn't. The feeling of being watched was no longer confined to the street. It followed me all the way home. Sometimes, when I was walking around the apartment, I would feel a cold draft brush past my shoulder, or a heavy sensation pressing on my chest, as if someone was standing right behind me. When I turned around, there was only empty air. This unusual coldness had nothing to do with the room's temperature. It was biting cold and carried an indescribable gloom. Terrifying dreams began to plague my sleep. I dreamt I was back on that deserted road, and the tall, thin black shadow relentlessly pursued me. In the dream, I couldn't run any faster, and the shadow would finally touch me, bringing with it a feeling of intense cold and utter terror that made me jolt awake. My heart pounding, drenched in cold sweat. I often woke up feeling more exhausted than rested. The tension accumulated daily. The strange noises in the apartment became more frequent and clearer, no longer vague sounds. The creaking floorboards now sounded like heavy, hurried footsteps. Objects in the kitchen would sometimes fall and break for no apparent reason, making loud noises that startled me. I began to hear very faint whispers when I was alone, especially at night. When everything was quiet, the whispers were indistinct, their content incomprehensible, but they always carried a cold and eerie tone, as if calling my name or saying something malevolent. They seemed to come from every corner of the apartment, sometimes from the dark hallway, sometimes from the bedroom wall, sometimes as if echoing from deep within the shadows. One night, as I was trying to sleep, I heard a very clear whisper right beside my ear. It softly called my name. Drawn out, "Eleanor, Eleanor." The voice was thin, cold, and utterly haunting, unlike any voice I had ever heard. I sat up, my heart racing, looking around the pitch-black room. No one was there, but I was sure I had heard that call. I started seeing fleeting black shadows in the corner of my eye as I moved around the apartment. Blurry, spectral shapes, darting quickly from room to room, or disappearing behind doors. Every time I saw one, I felt a cold shiver run down my spine, accompanied by a prickling sensation. Once, when I was looking in the bathroom mirror, I briefly saw a terrifying image reflected behind me. A pale, distorted face, with deep black eyes and a ferocious expression, staring intently at me through the mirror. I quickly turned around, but there was no one behind me. When I looked back at the mirror, the terrifying image was gone, leaving only my own frightened face. I began to doubt myself, wondering if I was hallucinating, but the fear and horror felt too real. The haunting began to severely affect my health and sanity. I suffered from severe insomnia, constantly feeling stressed, anxious, and debilitated. My work also suffered because I couldn't concentrate. My productivity plummeting. I started to become more withdrawn, avoiding social interaction, and even suspecting those around me. I knew I couldn't continue living like this. I decided to delve deeper into the history of this old apartment. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to find the cause. I inquired with the older neighbors, especially Agnes right across the hall, who had lived here almost her entire life. Agnes was initially quite reserved, but when I described my experiences, she seemed empathetic and finally shared a chilling story she had heard from her parents. She told me that decades ago, in the 1970s, a young woman named Sarah Miller had lived in my exact apartment. Sarah was quite reclusive, and seemed constantly haunted by an invisible fear. Agnes remembered that Sarah frequently complained to neighbors about feeling like someone was following her on the street at night, and strange phenomena occurring in her apartment. One night, Sarah mysteriously disappeared. No one knew where she went. The police investigated, but found no trace. The apartment was then left vacant for a long time, and subsequent tenants usually only stayed for a short period before moving out again. Agnes didn't explicitly state the cause, but her tone implied that something unsettling had happened to Sarah, and it might have involved a mysterious shadow. After my conversation with Agnes, I returned to the apartment and started looking for more concrete clues. I thoroughly searched every nook and cranny, hoping to find something previous tenants had overlooked. Finally, behind a rotten wooden floorboard in the kitchen, I found an old diary. It was written in a trembling, desperate hand. It was Sarah Miller's diary. The diary entries detailed her experiences: invisible footsteps following her on the street, shadows flitting through the apartment, whispers calling her name, and the feeling of being haunted by an unseen entity. Sarah had written that she believed a black shadow was watching her, wanting to harm her. The last line of the diary simply read, "It has come." I shivered. The history of the apartment, of Sarah Miller, and what I was going through horrifyingly aligned. That black shadow wasn't a figment of imagination. It was real, and it had haunted Sarah. Now it was haunting me. After reading Sarah's diary, I had no more doubts. That black shadow was real, and it had been following me since I moved here. Just as it had followed Sarah, fear turned into utter horror. I knew I was no longer safe. The strange phenomena in the apartment became more violent than ever. The whispers were no longer whispers, but grotesque cackles, echoing throughout the apartment. Objects not only fell and broke, but were violently thrown against walls. The room's temperature suddenly dropped below freezing, even though the heater was on. One night, as I was trying to sleep in the living room, because I didn't dare go into the bedroom, I felt an immense pressure on my chest, unable to breathe. At the same time, the light from the only nightstand lamp in the room began to flicker wildly, and then went out, leaving the room plunged into darkness. In the dense darkness, I saw a figure. It stood right in the middle of the living room, tall and thin, completely black like a void in space. It had no face, no specific details, just an absolute mass of shadow. But I could feel it staring at me, radiating a bone-chilling coldness and pure malice. The whisper echoed clearer than ever, not from everywhere, but from the black shadow itself. A low, guttural voice, full of hunger and cruelty. "You won't escape, like her." I realized it was referring to Sarah. That black shadow didn't want me to escape. It wanted to repeat Sarah's fate. I screamed, but no sound came out. It began to move, one step at a time, slowly advancing towards me. I felt an invisible force pressing down on me. Unable to move, When the shadow was only a few steps away, I felt its terrifying coldness, as if death itself was standing right before me. In a moment of pure desperation, I thrashed with all my might, channeling all my remaining strength into the loudest scream of my life. My scream seemed to shatter the air. The black shadow froze, then slowly dissipated into the darkness, leaving me alone in the cold room. The light from the nightstand lamp flickered back on. Dimly, I lay there, gasping for breath, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding like a drum. I didn't waste another second. Immediately, I got up, rushed to my pre-packed suitcase, and ran out of the apartment. I didn't dare look back at the house. I ran into the street, not stopping until I reached a friend's house in the next town. Laura Davis. I told Laura everything, even though I knew she'd find it hard to believe. I moved out of Salem, Massachusetts, and never returned to that apartment. I lived with Laura for a while, and then found a new place in another city, further away, where I felt safer, but the haunting image of the black shadow still clings to me. I still frequently have nightmares about it, about the invisible footsteps on the street, about the whispers in the dark, and especially Sarah Miller's pale face in the diary. Every time I walk alone at night, no matter where, I feel watched. I feel an unusual coldness. And I feel like that black shadow is still out there somewhere, lurking, waiting. I don't know what that black shadow was. A wandering spirit? A malevolent entity? Or an ancient curse of Salem that latched onto the apartment and anyone who lived there? I never got an answer. I only know that there are true horrors lurking right on seemingly familiar streets, and in seemingly ordinary houses. And sometimes, we unwittingly become the next victim of a hidden history, forever haunted by something that once followed someone else, and will now never let us go. Story 2. The House at the End of Hawthorne Avenue. I'm Olivia Reed, a 27-year-old interior designer, and my boyfriend, Ethan Carter, a 28-year-old software engineer. In the summer of 2023, we made a big decision, moving from the hustle and bustle of New York City to a charmingly old house on the outskirts of Richmond, Virginia. Ethan had just landed a new job there, and we craved a quieter space. A small yard for our golden retriever, Max. The house we bought was at the end of Hawthorne Avenue, a heavily wooded and rather secluded neighborhood. It looked ordinary, a little rundown, with old brick walls and a decaying wooden porch. I've always been a bit sensitive to strange things, while Ethan is much more practical. I often kept my little worries to myself, especially after losing my grandmother a few years ago. She used to believe in spiritual things, and I was always skeptical. Until now. The first few weeks in our new home passed peacefully. We spent our time painting, arranging furniture, and exploring the neighborhood. Max loved running around the spacious yard, and his joyful barks often filled the quietness of the house. The smell of old wood and dust was quickly replaced by fresh paint and scented candles. One late evening, while Ethan was at work, I was sitting and reading in the living room. Max was curled up at my feet, occasionally snorting in his sleep. Suddenly, I heard a faint sound from upstairs. A creak. It sounded like light footsteps on the wooden floor. I looked up, listening. Nothing. I told myself it was probably just the old house settling. A few days later, I heard it again, this time, a little clearer. A faint rustle from the master bedroom upstairs, which we hadn't thoroughly cleaned yet. I checked again, but the room was still empty, dusty and quiet. I told Ethan, but he just smiled and said, "Honey, this house is over 100 years old. It's bound to make noises." Small sounds started to appear more frequently. Faint whispers from a corner of the kitchen in the middle of the night. When I went to get a drink, a light clinking from the old china cabinet in the dining room, even though there was no breeze. There was even one instance when a small photo frame on my bedside table, containing a picture of Ethan and me, was inexplicably tilted. I straightened it, and told myself Max had accidentally bumped it when jumping on the bed. But Max was sound asleep on the floor at the time. A feeling of being watched also began to creep in. Sometimes, when I was in a room, I felt as if someone was standing right behind me. A sudden cold draft would sweep by, making me shiver. But when I turned around, I always found nothing. Strange dreams also began to surface. I dreamt I was wandering through the house at night, and heard faint sobs coming from a locked room. I often woke up feeling uneasy and tired. The strange occurrences slowly escalated. They were no longer vague, small noises. One afternoon, when I was home alone, cleaning my study on the second floor, I caught a glimpse of a black shadow darting past in my peripheral vision. It was very fast, just a blurry outline, flitting across the hallway and disappearing into the master bedroom. I froze, my heart pounding. I ran into the hallway, looked into the master bedroom, but there was nothing, only dust and the afternoon sun streaming in through the old window. I tried to believe it was just an optical illusion due to my tired eyes. Occasionally, I heard very faint whispers. At first, I thought it was the wind whistling through cracks in the door, but gradually, it sounded more and more like human speech. It was indistinct, like distorted words, but always carried a sorrowful and desperate tone. It seemed to come from our bedroom wall, or from the attic. Ethan started to notice my anxiety. "What's wrong, Liv? You seem really stressed," he asked. I just tried to smile and said it was due to work pressure. I didn't want him to think I was imagining things. Objects in the house sometimes fell or moved more forcefully. A glass on the kitchen counter spontaneously fell to the floor and shattered when I was standing right next to it. Another time, a heavy book on the living room bookshelf slid off and crashed to the floor with a loud thud. Max, our dog, also started showing strange behaviors. He would frequently bark at a certain corner of the living room, or growl inexplicably at thin air. Sometimes, he would sit next to me and whimper softly, as if sensing my fear. The strange dreams recurred with terrifying intensity. I dreamt I was in the house, but everything was dark and cold. I heard faint sobs, followed by a woman's terrified screams, then a loud crash, like something breaking. I often woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in cold sweat, with that scream still echoing in my ears. The tension escalated to an undeniable level. The strange noises had become terrifying sounds. The footsteps upstairs were no longer creaks, but distinct footsteps. Slow and deliberate, occasionally stopping right above us when we were downstairs. One night, as Ethan and I were watching a movie in the living room, I heard someone call my name, very clearly, from the dark hallway leading to the kitchen. "Olivia." A woman's voice, faint but utterly haunting. I turned to look at Ethan. He had heard it too. "Did you hear that, Ethan?" I asked, my voice trembling. Ethan nodded, his face pale. "I heard it too. Liv, is it someone in the house?" A sudden coldness enveloped the living room. The air became heavy. Max began to growl fiercely at the corner of the hallway, his fur bristling. Ethan and I clung to each other, staring into the darkness. There was no one, After that night, the phenomena became more direct. Objects not only fell and broke, but were purposefully moved. Our kitchen knife suddenly appeared on the bathroom sink. The cabinet doors in the kitchen automatically opened at night. Once, as I was looking in the bedroom mirror, I caught a terrifying reflection behind me. A pale, distorted woman's face, with messy black hair, sunken eyes staring at me through the mirror. She had no expression, just an unnerving emptiness. I whirled around, but there was no one. When I looked back in the mirror, the image was gone, leaving only my own terrified face. I let out a scream. Ethan ran in, anxiously asking what was wrong. I could only point at the mirror. Trembling, he tried to reassure me, but I knew what I had seen. My fear became more evident to Ethan. He started to doubt himself, but the strange occurrences happened too frequently to ignore. The terrifying events became more frequent, and we could no longer deny them. One night, as we slept, a blood-curdling scream erupted from downstairs. A woman's scream, full of pain and terror. It was exactly like the scream I had heard in my dreams. Ethan and I jolted awake, our hearts pounding. Max began barking frantically from the foot of the bed. We didn't dare go downstairs. The scream lasted for a few seconds, then abruptly ceased, leaving a chilling silence. When dawn broke, we cautiously went downstairs. Nothing was out of place. No signs of forced entry. No disturbed belongings. Everything was eerily quiet. But that scream, it was too real. I began to feel possessed. Sometimes, I would inexplicably stand still in the middle of a room, staring into thin air with an unusual coldness. Or I would say things that made no sense, or hear another voice whispering in my head. Ethan noticed that my eyes were sometimes empty, lifeless, as if it wasn't me. Once, while talking to Ethan, I suddenly felt a bone-chilling cold run down my spine. My voice automatically changed, becoming thin and unfamiliar. I started saying things I couldn't control. You can't save her. No one can save her. Ethan looked at me with horror in his eyes. I tried to regain consciousness, but I felt a strong force trying to control me. Finally, I broke free, but I was terrified of what was happening to me. Max also became more agitated with certain corners of the house. He would growl and scratch at a wall in the master bedroom, as if wanting to tear apart something hidden within. We knew that something evil was residing in this house, and it was trying to possess me. Desperation pushed me to find the truth. I couldn't let myself and Ethan get caught in this spiral. Ethan also started to believe what was happening, and we decided to investigate the house's history together. We went back to see Agnes. This time, she was much more open. Perhaps seeing our desperation, she told us about the family who lived in the house before Sarah Miller moved in, a young couple in the 1950s. The couple were Eleanor and David Thompson. They had a seemingly happy life, until Eleanor, the young woman, began to show strange symptoms. She suffered from severe postpartum depression after giving birth to their first child, a baby girl. And it seemed she started seeing or hearing things others couldn't. Agnes said that one night, David discovered Eleanor had done something terrible. She didn't go into detail, but her face conveyed horror. Soon after, Eleanor committed suicide in the house. David, devastated, abandoned the house and never returned. Agnes also said that people rumored Eleanor's spirit still lingered in the house. Trapped in her grief and madness, Agnes's story sent shivers down our spines. Especially the name Eleanor Thompson. Because my name is also Eleanor. Could that be why the ghost was targeting me? We returned to the house. and began to meticulously search for old belongings left behind. Finally, in a small wooden box hidden in a wall cavity in the attic, we found an old diary. Its cover was rotten, and the pages inside were stained with reddish-brown marks. Looking like dried blood, it was Eleanor Thompson's diary. The handwriting was shaky, filled with despair and frenzy. She wrote about feeling watched, whispers in her head, and a darkness trying to control her. She also wrote about her loss, the grief after giving birth. The most terrifying part were the last lines, describing how she was manipulated to do something unforgivable, before ending with a desperate cry and a painful apology. The diary didn't explicitly state her actions, but it horrifyingly hinted at the tragic event that had occurred in the house. We understood the reason for the intense haunting. Eleanor Thompson's spirit was trapped in profound grief, unbearable remorse, and madness. She was controlled by some malevolent entity, and now, that entity was trying to do the same to me. After reading the diary, the atmosphere in the house became suffocating and extremely tense. We knew we had no more time. The black shadow was not Eleanor Thompson, but the entity that had controlled her. And it was targeting me. The ghostly phenomena reached their peak. Doors and windows automatically slammed shut with force, glass panes rattling violently. The whispers turned into angry screams and direct threats. Max barked incessantly, trying to lunge at an invisible space. One night, as we were trying to sleep in the living room, a blood-curdling scream erupted from the master bedroom upstairs. It was Eleanor Thompson's scream. The scream I had heard in my dreams. The scream of ultimate suffering and despair. Immediately after, a loud crash reverberated, as if a heavy object had fallen to the floor. We couldn't take it anymore. Ethan and I decided to confront it. We grabbed flashlights and a small crucifix I found among my grandmother's belongings. Our hearts pounding, we slowly ascended the stairs. When we reached the master bedroom door, it was ajar. Inside, everything was in disarray. The bed was pushed aside, the sheets torn, and in the middle of the room, right where the baby crib used to be, according to Agnes, a pitch-black figure appeared clearer than ever. It had no details, just a dense mass of shadow, standing silently, radiating a bone-chilling coldness. It turned its head towards me, and in that darkness, I felt a gaze full of malevolence and hunger staring at me. The whisper echoed in my head again, this time clearer and stronger, "You will be mine, just like her." I felt an invisible force pulling me towards the shadow. Ethan screamed, trying to pull me back. I struggled, resisted, but the pull was too strong. The shadow began to move, taking small steps towards me. I saw Ethan's frightened face, and heard Max growling, trying to get past Ethan to reach me. In that moment, I closed my eyes, thinking of my grandmother, of the stories of faith she used to tell. I clutched the crucifix tightly in my hand. I felt a powerful surge of energy pass through me. I screamed, "Get out! You have no right to be here. You cannot control me." The black shadow froze. A guttural growl echoed in the air, not from Max, but a deep, malevolent sound. Then, it slowly retreated, and vanished into the darkness, leaving behind a terrifying coldness and a pungent smell of sulfur. We stood there for a long time, gasping for breath. The house became eerily silent. We left that house that very night. We never returned. The house at the end of Hawthorne Avenue still stands there, empty and silent, waiting for its next victim. We moved out of Richmond, Virginia, and never returned to Hawthorne Avenue. Ethan and I went through a difficult period of recovery after what we witnessed. The haunting memory of the black shadow still clings to me, especially the nightmares replaying Eleanor Thompson's scream and the feeling of being controlled. I don't know exactly what that black shadow was. Perhaps a demon? A malevolent entity that had resided in the house for decades, sowing tragedy for the women who lived there. I never got an answer. But I know one thing for sure. There are places where tragic histories are never fully buried. And sometimes, old, seemingly ordinary houses harbor terrifying secrets, waiting to possess vulnerable souls. We were lucky to escape, but that fear will forever be a part of us. Story 3. The House Next to the Cemetery. I'm Sarah Jenkins, a 29-year-old middle school teacher, who recently moved to the outskirts of Savannah, Georgia in late 2019. I've always been very passionate about my profession, but a public school teacher's salary wasn't enough for me to live comfortably on my own. So, I started taking on private tutoring jobs in the evenings. I have a weakness of being quite sensitive to surrounding energies, and sometimes I feel like I can see or sense things that others can't. I kept this hidden, afraid of being judged. One day, I received a tutoring offer from a family who had just moved in to a large, old house, located right next to an old cemetery on the edge of town. The house looked ordinary, a little rundown, with brick walls covered in moss and large windows hidden beneath ancient oak trees. I knew Savannah had a long history of ghost stories, but I always tried to maintain a practical outlook. The first time I went to the house to meet the family, the Davidsons. It was Mrs. Davidson, a kind but somewhat tired-looking middle-aged woman, and her son, Michael, a quiet 10-year-old boy. The house was large, but seemed a bit dark and damp. Even in broad daylight, I felt a cold draft pass through me as I stepped through the front door, even though it was quite warm outside. It was a very uncomfortable feeling, as if someone was watching from the shadows. We started our tutoring sessions 3 evenings a week. Every time I went there, I felt a strange sensation. The house had an old smell, the scent of decaying wood and dust, mixed with an indescribable odor, like dampness combined with a faint hint of decay. The light in the house was always dim, whether it was day or night, as if absorbed by something unseen. The first signs were very subtle. Sometimes, when I was tutoring Michael in the study room, the house's old living room, I would hear small noises from upstairs. The creak of floorboards, the faint click of a door. I always thought it was due to the old house or Mrs. Davidson moving around. Michael was a good boy, but seemed a bit shy and quiet. He would sometimes stare at a certain corner of the study room, or up at the ceiling. With a worried look, I asked him if he was okay. Michael just shook his head and whispered, "Nothing, Miss Sarah." A few times, when I was writing on the small whiteboard, I felt as if someone was standing right behind me. A sudden cold sensation would envelop me, making me shiver. But when I turned around, I always found nothing, only Michael's chair and our study table. Nights at home, I started having strange dreams. I dreamt I was in that house, but everything was darker and colder. I heard faint sobs coming from a locked room on the second floor, and felt an unknown fear. I often woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in cold sweat, with the feeling that what I dreamt was real. The strange occurrences started to become more frequent and more noticeable. In the study room, I began to notice small objects being moved. The pencil I had just placed on the table would suddenly be on the floor. The textbook I was using was inexplicably shifted on the bookshelf. I had once thought Michael was being mischievous, but he always sat quietly when I was teaching. One time, as I was helping Michael with a math problem, one of the family photos on the shelf suddenly shifted. It was a picture of Mrs. Davidson and her husband. He had passed away a few years prior. I told Mrs. Davidson about it. She just forced a smile and said, "I must not have placed it securely." But her eyes showed a hint of worry she tried to conceal. The unusual coldness in the house also became more pronounced. It was no longer just a fleeting cold draft, but a distinct cold spot in the study room. Sometimes, the temperature in a certain corner of the room would suddenly drop very low, so much so that I could see my breath. I asked Michael if he felt cold. He just nodded and hunched his shoulders, saying, "I don't know, Miss Sarah, I just feel cold." My dreams also escalated. I dreamt I was no longer in the house, but in the adjacent cemetery. I saw an unmarked grave, and a blurry female figure standing beside it, weeping. I often woke up feeling sad and heavy, as if the woman's grief had seeped into me. I started to worry more about Michael. He was getting paler and quieter. Sometimes, he would stare at a fixed point in the study room, and whisper something I couldn't quite hear. I asked him what he was looking at. Michael just shook his head and said, "Nothing, miss." The tension in the house became so palpable that I couldn't ignore it anymore. The strange noises had become more terrifying sounds. The footsteps upstairs were no longer creaks, but distinct, heavy, hurried footsteps, pacing back and forth in the master bedroom right above our study room. Sometimes, I even heard faint gasps and scratching sounds from up there. One evening, as I was tutoring Michael, I heard someone call my name, very clearly, from the dark hallway leading up the stairs. "Sarah. Sarah Jenkins." A female voice, thin, faint but utterly haunting. I turned to look at Michael. He heard it too, his face ashen, his eyes wide with terror. "Miss Sarah, did you hear that?" Michael whispered. "I did," I replied, my voice trembling. A sudden coldness enveloped the entire study room. The air became heavy and hard to breathe. Max, the Davidsons' dog, who was usually downstairs, began to growl fiercely from the kitchen, his fur bristling. Michael and I could only cling to each other, staring into the dark doorway. No one was there, but the presence was too clear. After that night, the phenomena became more direct. Objects were not just shifted, but thrown. A flower vase on the table suddenly flew off the shelf and crashed to the floor, shattering. Cabinet doors in the study room automatically opened and closed continuously. One time, as I was going upstairs to retrieve a book I had forgotten on the second floor, I caught a glimpse of a black shadow flitting at the end of the hallway. A blurry, tall and thin shadow stood motionless for a moment, then slowly turned its head to look at me. I couldn't make out its face, but I felt an overwhelming sense of grief and anger radiating from it. I froze, my heart pounding. When I blinked, the black shadow had vanished. I recounted everything to Mrs. Davidson. She finally couldn't hide it anymore. She looked at me with despair, and said that she too had experienced similar things since moving in. She believed the house was haunted. The terrifying events became more frequent, and we couldn't deny them any longer. My fear had spread to both Mrs. Davidson and Michael. One night, as I was tutoring Michael, a blood-curdling scream erupted from upstairs. A woman's scream, full of pain and terror. It was exactly like the scream I had heard in my dreams. The scream lasted for a few seconds, then abruptly ceased, leaving a chilling silence. Michael screamed, clinging to me. Mrs. Davidson rushed into the study room, her face pale. When the scream stopped, the air in the house became thick. A foul odor, like rotting flesh and sulfur, suddenly permeated the room. Max began to vomit uncontrollably in the kitchen corner. I started to feel possessed when I was in that house. Sometimes, I would inexplicably stand still in the middle of a room, staring into thin air with an unusual coldness. Or I would say things that made no sense, or hear another voice whispering in my head, urging me to do terrible things. Mrs. Davidson noticed that my eyes were sometimes empty, lifeless, as if it wasn't me. Once, while I was helping Michael with his homework, I suddenly felt a bone-chilling cold run down my spine. My voice automatically changed, becoming thin and unfamiliar. I started saying things I couldn't control. She killed the child. She killed the child. Michael looked at me with horror in his eyes. Mrs. Davidson immediately pulled me out of the room, trying to calm me down. I tried to regain consciousness, but I felt a strong force trying to control me. Finally, I broke free, but I was terrified of what was happening to me. Michael also became more frantic. He kept talking about a sad woman being in the house. He was afraid to sleep alone, and had frequent nightmares. Desperation pushed us to find the truth. Mrs. Davidson and I knew that something terrible had happened in this house, and it was trying to repeat that tragedy. We meticulously searched the house, hoping to find any clues about its history. We asked other locals, but it seemed no one wanted to talk about that house. Finally, an old cemetery caretaker, Mr. Abernathy, an elderly man, told us a horrifying story. Mr. Abernathy said that, many years ago, in the 1950s, a young couple lived in that house, named Eleanor and James Thorne. They had a little daughter named Lily. Eleanor was a young woman, seemingly gentle, but she suffered from severe postpartum depression. James, her husband, was often away on business trips. One day, Lily, their young daughter, mysteriously disappeared from the house. The police searched everywhere, but found no trace of the little girl. People rumored that Eleanor had done something terrible to her daughter in a fit of depression and hallucination, after which she committed suicide in the house. Right in the master bedroom upstairs. Lily's body was never found. James, heartbroken and devastated, abandoned the house and never returned. Mr. Abernathy also said that people living near the cemetery often spoke of seeing a female figure wandering in the cemetery at night, and sometimes they heard a child's cry from that house. Mr. Abernathy's story sent shivers down our spines, especially the detail about postpartum depression and the horrific act. This house had witnessed a heartbreaking tragedy, and the spirit of Eleanor Thorne, trapped in her grief and madness, was seeking release, or trying to repeat her horrific actions with me. We returned to the house, and with a newfound fear, we searched more thoroughly in the master bedroom upstairs. In a hidden drawer under the old wardrobe floor, we found a small, yellowed and moldy diary. It was Eleanor Thorne's diary. The handwriting was shaky, filled with despair and frenzy. She wrote about hearing whispers, seeing shadows, and feeling urged by something to harm her child. She wrote about her grief, sleeplessness, and the fear that she couldn't protect Lily from herself, or from the thing that was haunting her. The last lines described the utter despair and the horrific act she was manipulated into performing. before ending with heart-wrenching cries and a painful apology to Lily. I shivered. The scream I heard, the foul smell, and the feeling of being possessed. It all connected to Eleanor Thorne's and Lily's tragedy. That black shadow, the thing that haunted Eleanor, was trying to do the same to me. After reading the diary, the atmosphere in the house became suffocating and extremely tense. Mrs. Davidson and I knew that we had no more time. That black shadow was not Eleanor Thorne, but the entity that had controlled her. And it was targeting me. To replay Lily's tragedy, the ghostly phenomena reached their peak. Furniture in the master bedroom was thrown around wildly. Angry screams and direct threats echoed throughout the house. Mrs. Davidson clutched Michael, who was sobbing uncontrollably. One night, as I was in the study room, preparing to leave, I felt a terrifying coldness envelop me. All the lights in the house flickered off. The room was plunged into darkness. I saw a pitch-black figure appear in the middle of the study room, tall and thin. Completely black like a void in space. It had no face, but I felt its presence staring at me, radiating a bone-chilling coldness and pure malice. The whisper echoed clearer than ever, not from everywhere, but from the black shadow itself. A low, guttural voice, full of hunger and cruelty. "You will be mine, like Eleanor." I felt an invisible force pulling me towards the shadow. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I struggled, resisted, but the pull was too strong. The shadow began to move, taking small steps towards me. I saw Michael's and Mrs. Davidson's frightened faces from the hallway. In that moment, I closed my eyes, thinking of Lily, the innocent child. I couldn't let this tragedy repeat itself. I channeled all my remaining strength into the loudest scream of my life. "You cannot harm that child. You cannot control me. Get out." My scream seemed to shatter the air. The black shadow froze. A guttural growl echoed in the air, not from Max, but a deep, malevolent sound. Then, it slowly retreated and vanished into the darkness, leaving behind a terrifying coldness and a pungent smell of sulfur. Mrs. Davidson and I clung to Michael. The room became eerily silent. The next day, we left that house. Mrs. Davidson decided to sell it immediately. We never returned. The house next to the cemetery still stands there, empty and silent, waiting for its next victim. I quit my tutoring job in Savannah, Georgia, and found a new job in a different state. I still kept in touch with Mrs. Davidson and Michael. They also moved and are slowly settling into their lives. But the haunting memory of the house and the black shadow still clings to me. I still frequently have nightmares about Eleanor Thorne's scream, and the feeling of being controlled. Every time I step into an old house, especially dimly lit ones, I feel watched. I feel an unusual coldness. And I feel like that black shadow is still out there somewhere. Lurking, waiting. I don't know exactly what that black shadow was. A demon? A malevolent entity that had resided in the house for decades, sowing tragedy for the women who lived there? I never got an answer. But I know one thing for sure. There are places where tragic histories are never fully buried. And sometimes, old, seemingly ordinary houses harbor terrifying secrets, waiting to possess vulnerable souls. I was lucky to escape, but that fear will forever be a part of me. Story 4. The Shadow by the Roanoke River. I'm Chloe Adams, a 20-year-old college student, and my best friend, Sophia Miller, also 20. We shared a small apartment on the outskirts of Roanoke, Virginia in early 2024. We both loved the peaceful life here. especially the Roanoke River that flows through the town. After stressful study hours, our favorite pastime was walking along the riverbank every evening, enjoying the cool air and chatting. The riverside path was usually quite deserted at night, with only a few dim streetlights and the gentle sound of flowing water. I've always been a bit of an overthinker, prone to worrying, while Sophia is much more rational and strong. I often kept my little anxieties to myself, afraid of Sophia making fun of me. Our first few evenings by the Roanoke River were truly peaceful. We usually walked for about an hour, enjoying the fresh air and the tranquility. The gentle ripple of the water, the chirping of insects, and occasionally the rustle of leaves in the wind, created a natural symphony. One Tuesday evening, as we were walking past a section of the path that was more deserted than usual, where a row of ancient trees cast long shadows onto the ground, I suddenly felt a cold gust of air. Even though it was summer, the cold was sharp, like a blade cutting through the air. I shivered. "Are you cold, Soph?" I asked, my voice slightly trembling. Sophia rubbed her arms. "A bit cold. Yes, must be the wind from the river." As we continued walking, I started to hear a strange sound. Faint whispers. It wasn't clear, like the wind, but it had a sorrowful tone, like someone sobbing. I glanced at Sophia, but she didn't seem to hear it. "Chloe, what's wrong? Your face is pale," Sophia asked. "Nothing, I'm just a bit tired," I lied, not wanting her to think I was imagining things. On subsequent walks, the signs became more subtle. Sometimes, when walking past dense bushes by the riverbank, I'd catch a blurry shadow flitting in my peripheral vision. It was very quick, indistinct in shape, just an undefined movement in the darkness. I always tried to turn back to look, but saw nothing. A feeling of being watched also began to creep in. While walking, I often felt as if someone was walking right behind us, even though I heard no third set of footsteps. It was a heavy, uncomfortable sensation, like invisible eyes staring at our backs. I frequently turned my head, but the path was always deserted. Strange dreams also began to plague my sleep. I dreamt I was walking along the riverbank at night, and heard the faint sobs of a woman from under the water. I often woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in cold sweat, with those sobs still echoing in my ears. The strange occurrences gradually escalated, and they were no longer easy to dismiss. One Friday evening, as we were walking, the whispers in my ear became clearer. This time, it wasn't crying anymore, but my name being called, "Chloe. Chloe Adams," a female voice, thin, faint but utterly haunting, as if echoing from the river's surface. I stopped abruptly. Sophia also stopped, looking at me. "Did you hear that?" Sophia asked, her voice worried. I did," I stammered. Immediately, a bone-chilling cold enveloped us. The air became thick, hard to breathe. Our breaths plumed out in the unusually cold air. Despite there being no strong wind, the leaves on the ancient trees nearby began to rustle fiercely, as if an invisible gust was swirling. The cold and the calling name terrified us. We stared at the dark river surface. No one was there, only the gentle sound of flowing water and rustling leaves. We decided to head home immediately, running for our lives, not daring to look back. After that night, the phenomena became more direct, not just limited to the riverbank. Sometimes, when we were in the apartment, I heard strange noises from inside. Faint footsteps on the floor when no one was walking. The refrigerator door automatically opening a crack. Once, when I was looking in the bathroom mirror, I caught a terrifying reflection behind me. A pale female face, with long, wet, straggly hair, deep sunken eyes staring at me through the mirror. She had no expression, just an unnerving emptiness. I whirled around, but there was no one. When I looked back in the mirror, the image was gone, leaving only my own frightened face. I let out a scream. Sophia ran in, anxiously asking what was wrong. I could only point at the mirror. Trembling, she tried to reassure me, but I knew what I had seen. Sophia started to genuinely worry. She couldn't ignore what was happening. The terrifying events became more frequent, and we could no longer deny them. My dreams became so vivid and terrifying that I was afraid to sleep. I dreamt I was standing by the riverbank on a pitch-black night. The river water was black, and from beneath it, a female figure emerged. She had long, soaking wet hair, almost completely covering her face. She reached out to me, her deep black eyes staring directly into mine. I heard her whisper my name. A husky, chilling voice. Come to me, stay here forever. I often woke up to my own screams. Drenched in sweat, Sophia no longer slept soundly either. She frequently heard me having nightmares and tried to wake me up. One night, as we slept, a blood-curdling scream erupted from the riverbank. A woman's scream, full of pain and terror. It was exactly like the scream I had heard in my dreams. The scream lasted for a few seconds, then abruptly ceased, leaving a chilling silence. Sophia and I jolted awake, our hearts pounding. We looked at each other, knowing it wasn't a dream. After that night, the air in the apartment became heavy. A foul odor, like murky river water and rotting mud, suddenly permeated the room, even though the windows were closed. I started to feel possessed when I was near the river, or even when I was in my apartment. Sometimes, I would inexplicably stand still in the middle of a room, staring into thin air with an unusual coldness. Or I would say things that made no sense, or hear another voice whispering in my head, urging me to go to the riverbank. Sophia noticed that my eyes were sometimes empty, lifeless, as if it wasn't me. Once, as we were getting ready for class, I suddenly felt a bone-chilling cold run down my spine. My voice automatically changed, becoming thin and unfamiliar. I started saying things I couldn't control. She wants to drag me down. She doesn't want me to go. Sophia looked at me with horror in her eyes. She gripped my hand, pulling me out of the apartment. I tried to regain consciousness, but I felt a strong force trying to control me. Finally, I broke free, but I was terrified of what was happening to me. Desperation drove us to seek the truth. Sophia and I knew that something terrible had happened by this river, and it was haunting me. We began to search for information about the history of the Roanoke River and the surrounding area. We asked older locals, especially Eleanor Vance, an elderly woman who lived nearby and had been there almost her entire life. Eleanor was initially quite reserved, but when we told her about our experiences, she seemed empathetic and finally shared a chilling story she had heard from her parents. She said that, decades ago, in the 1970s, a young girl named Lily Thorne had committed suicide at the very section of the river where we usually walked. Lily was a young, seemingly beautiful girl, but she suffered from severe depression after a family tragedy. She jumped into the river one dark night, and her body was never found. People rumored that her spirit still lingered by the riverbank, seeking peace, or seeking someone to drag down with her. Eleanor also said that people often spoke of seeing a soaking wet female figure wandering along the riverbank on dark nights, and sometimes they heard faint sobs or a calling name from the water. She added that, Some people who had been haunted by the girl also started to have a tendency to go to the riverbank at night. Eleanor's story sent shivers down our spines. Especially the detail about depression and suicide. The spirit of Lily Thorne, trapped in her grief and despair, was trying to drag me down with her. We returned to the apartment. And with a newfound fear, we searched more thoroughly online for disappearances or suicides in the Roanoke River area in the 70s. Finally, we found an old, yellowed article from a local newspaper. It recounted the mysterious disappearance of Lily Thorne, a 19-year-old girl, last seen near the Roanoke River. The article also mentioned her history of depression. The last line of the article read, "Ms. Thorne's body was never found. And the case remains open." I shivered. The scream I heard, the foul smell, and the feeling of being possessed. It all connected to Lily Thorne's tragedy. That figure, the one that had been haunting me, was Lily Thorne herself. After reading the article, the atmosphere in the apartment became suffocating and extremely tense. Sophia and I knew that we had no more time. Lily Thorne's spirit was haunting me, and she wanted to drag me into the river. The ghostly phenomena reached their peak. In the apartment, furniture shook violently, lights flickered continuously, then went out. The whispers turned into angry screams and direct threats, echoing throughout the room. One night, as I was trying to sleep, I felt a terrifying coldness envelop me. An invisible force pulled me out of bed, towards the window. I tried to resist, to scream, but no sound came out. Sophia jolted awake, looking at me with horror. She tried to pull me back, but I felt I was being pulled by a force stronger than her. I saw a blurry female figure, with long, soaking wet hair, standing just outside the window. On the other side of the glass, she reached out to me, her deep black eyes staring directly into mine. I heard her voice, thin, chilling, "Come to me, we'll be here forever." Sophia tried her best to hold me back. She kept calling my name, shaking me. For a moment, I regained a bit of consciousness. I looked at Sophia, saw the utter terror in her eyes. I couldn't let this happen. I didn't want to become a second Lily Thorne. I channeled all my remaining strength into the loudest scream of my life. "No. I am not yours. You cannot drag me down." My scream seemed to shatter the air. The female figure outside the window froze. A guttural growl echoed in the air, not from Sophia, but a deep, malevolent sound. Then, it slowly retreated, and vanished into the darkness, leaving behind a terrifying coldness and the pungent smell of murky river water. The weight pressing on me vanished. I fell to the floor, gasping for breath. Sophia held me tightly. The room became eerily silent. The very next morning, we left that apartment. We never dared to walk along the Roanoke riverbank again. Sophia and I moved to a different city, further away, where no large river flowed through. Our lives gradually returned to normal. But the haunting memory of Lily Thorne still clings to me. I still frequently have nightmares about her screams, and the feeling of being controlled. Every time I hear the gentle ripple of water, or see a deserted riverbank, I feel watched. I feel an unusual coldness. And I feel as if Lily Thorne's spirit is still out there somewhere, lurking, waiting. I don't know exactly if Lily Thorne wanted to drag me into the river for companionship, or if she wanted me to suffer the same pain. I never got an answer. But I know one thing for sure. There are places where tragedy and pain are deeply buried, but their spirits still linger, seeking release, or seeking their next victim. We were lucky to escape, but that fear will forever be a part of us. The Roanoke River, however beautiful, still holds its own terrifying secrets. Story 5. Night Hook at Silent Creek Lake. I'm Daniel Hayes, 32 years old, recently divorced and moved into a small cabin by Silent Creek Lake in upstate New York in the fall of 2023. The broken marriage had affected me quite a bit. I became quiet and preferred to be alone. Night fishing was the only hobby that helped me relax and escape sad thoughts. Silent Creek Lake was famous for its pristine beauty and absolute silence at night. The log cabin I rented was in a rather secluded location, far from other houses. Surrounded by dense forests, the cabin looked ordinary, a bit old, with a characteristic musty smell and creaking wooden floors. I didn't know much about its history, only heard that it used to belong to a reclusive hunter. The first few nights of fishing at Silent Creek Lake were truly silent. Only the gentle breeze through the trees, the incessant chirping of insects, and the soft lapping of water against the shore could be heard. The moonlight shone down on the ink-black lake surface, creating a mystical and solitary scene. I often sat on my folding chair by the lake, casting my line and enjoying this rare tranquility. One night, as I was intently watching the red light on my fishing float, I heard a strange sound from under the lake, a light splash, like someone gently touching the water's surface, but not caused by a fish biting. It sounded like something larger moving deep below. I startled, listening. The lake surface remained as still as a mirror. I told myself it was probably just my imagination. On subsequent nights, when I was alone by the lake, I heard similar sounds again. The noises under the water became clearer. A rustling sound, like someone swimming slowly, or the dragging of something heavy along the lake bed. I began to feel uneasy. Besides the sounds from the water, I also heard other noises from the woods behind the log cabin. The cracking of twigs, the rustling of dry leaves, as if someone was walking in the darkness. I frequently turned around to look, but only saw the black silhouettes of trees under the moonlight. In the log cabin, when I was alone, I also started hearing small noises. The creaking of the floorboards at night, even though there was no wind. A light clinking from the small kitchen, as if someone was rummaging through things. Sometimes, the kerosene lamp on the table would suddenly sway gently, even though no one touched it. Strange dreams also began to appear. I dreamt I was standing in the middle of the lake at night, the dark lake water surrounding me. I felt something cold touch my feet from below, and heard faint gasping sounds echoing from the lake bed. I often woke up feeling breathless and utterly terrified. The initial signs gradually became more frightening, and they were no longer just vague noises. One night, as I was fishing near midnight, the faint moonlight shone on the lake surface. I caught a glimpse of a dark shadow darting in my peripheral vision. Right at the water's edge. It was very fast, just a blurry outline, flitting across and disappearing into the darkness of the lakeside bushes. I jumped up, my heart pounding. I shone my flashlight towards it, but only saw branches and darkness. I tried to reassure myself that it was just an illusion due to tired eyes. On subsequent nights, I began to feel like someone was watching me while fishing. The feeling of an invisible gaze staring at my back from the darkness of the woods. I frequently turned around, shining my flashlight all around, but saw nothing. One evening, as I was reeling in my line to go home because I hadn't caught anything, I heard a very faint whisper in my ear. It wasn't clear, like the wind blowing through the leaves, but it had a cold, eerie tone. It seemed to come from behind me, right at the nape of my neck. My hair stood on end. I whirled around, but only saw darkness and trees. Inside the log cabin, small objects began to shift positions inexplicably. The lighter I left on the table would suddenly be on the floor. The glass of water I placed next to my bed was moved to the middle of the room. I began to doubt myself. Was it just stress from the divorce causing hallucinations? My dreams also became more frightening. I dreamt I was being pulled underwater by a cold hand. I tried to struggle, to scream, but couldn't break free. The pale face of a woman, with long black hair obscuring her features, appeared faintly beneath the dark water. I often woke up feeling suffocated and utterly terrified. The tension continued to rise, the strange occurrences becoming more frequent and terrifying. One night, as I was fishing around midnight, the lake surface was eerily still. Suddenly, I heard someone call my name, very clearly, echoing from the middle of the lake, "Daniel. Daniel Hayes." A woman's voice, faint but full of sorrow and despair. I jumped, dropping my fishing rod into the water. I stood up abruptly, staring at the dark lake surface. Immediately, a bone-chilling cold enveloped the entire lakeside area. The temperature suddenly dropped very low, so much so that I could clearly see my breath in the night air. Strange air bubbles began to surface on the lake, and unusual ripples spread out. The cold and the calling name horrified me. I didn't dare take my eyes off the lake surface. Suddenly, from beneath the dark water, a pale, gaunt hand slowly emerged. The fingers were long and skeletal, reaching towards me as if pleading for help. I stood frozen, unable to move, my throat constricted so I couldn't speak. The hand slowly sank back down, but immediately after, strong swirls appeared on the water where it had disappeared. I heard a chilling whisper echoing in my ear. "You will stay here forever." I couldn't take it anymore. I quickly gathered my belongings, running frantically towards the log cabin, not daring to look back. Back at the cabin, I locked the door and sat trembling in the darkness. The strange noises in the house also became clearer. The footsteps on the floor were no longer light, but heavy. Hurried steps, pacing back and forth in the attic. The clinking in the kitchen also became louder, as if someone was throwing things around. I pulled the blanket over my head, trying to calm myself, but the calling name still echoed in my ear. "Daniel." The prolonged fear and sleeplessness were breaking me down. I decided to learn about the history of the log cabin in Silent Creek Lake. I went to the local library and searched for old information. I found a few old newspaper articles about a tragic accident that occurred at Silent Creek Lake in the 1980s. A young woman named Sarah Miller, 22 years old, had drowned in the lake while swimming at night. It was rumored that she had committed suicide due to a broken heart. Her body was found a few days later, but local residents still often spoke of seeing a woman in a white dress lingering around the lake on moonlit nights. I also found information about the hunter who had previously lived in the log cabin. His name was Jedediah Thorne. He lived a reclusive life and rarely interacted with anyone. There were rumors that he was a strange man, and involved in occult rituals. He had mysteriously disappeared from the cabin around the time of Sarah Miller's drowning. This information sent shivers down my spine. The calling name, the figure by the lake, it all seemed to relate to Sarah Miller. But what about the sounds under the water? And what connection did the strange hunter have to all of this? I returned to the log cabin, and began searching for old traces. In an old, dusty box in the attic, I found a yellow diary. It was Jedediah Thorne's diary. The entries in the diary were difficult to read, the handwriting shaky and many parts crossed out. But I still managed to decipher some important passages. Jedediah Thorne wrote about making a covenant with something in the lake in exchange for large catches of fish. He described strange rituals he performed by the lake at night, and the promises he had exchanged. In the diary, there were also passages where Jedediah Thorne mentioned a young woman who often came to swim in the lake at night. He seemed to be obsessed with her, and there were lines hinting at him doing something terrible to her. The last entry in the diary read, "It has taken my soul, and now, it wants more." The last date in the diary matched the time Sarah Miller drowned. A horrifying realization dawned on me. The calling name, the figure by the lake, the sounds under the water, it all related to Sarah Miller and Jedediah Thorne. He had made a covenant with a malevolent entity in the lake, and Sarah Miller was perhaps the price he had to pay. Now, that entity was still there, and it was targeting me. After reading the diary, the fear inside me reached its peak. I knew I was in real danger. The entity in the lake had awakened, and it wanted to drag me down. The ghostly phenomena became more violent. Inside the log cabin, furniture was thrown around. Windows automatically slammed open and shut. Angry screams and direct threats echoed everywhere. One night, as I was trying to hide in the bedroom, the door burst open. A tall, blurry black figure stood in the doorway. I couldn't make out its face, but I felt the immense hatred and rage emanating from it. The figure slowly moved towards me, its heavy footsteps creaking on the wooden floor. I screamed, leaping out of the window, and ran frantically towards the lake. I knew it was a mistake, but I had no other choice. Reaching the lake shore, the water was black and cold. I heard my name being called, clearer than ever. "Daniel, come here to me." I turned back. The black figure still stood there, at the edge of the woods, staring at me. Behind it, from beneath the lake's surface, a soaking wet female figure slowly emerged. Her face was pale, long black hair obscured it, and her deep black eyes stared at me with sorrow. I felt an invisible force pulling me towards the water. I tried to resist, clinging to the lakeside branches. But it was useless. My feet slid into the lake. As the icy water reached my chest, I saw Sarah Miller's face more clearly. Her eyes were full of sadness and loneliness. But then, something dark and grotesque emerged from behind her. A shapeless shadow, with long, writhing tentacles. It growled a monstrous sound, and lunged towards me. I screamed in horror, trying to struggle. Sarah Miller's cold hand gripped my leg, pulling me down into the water. I felt myself sinking deeper, darkness enveloping me. Under the cold, black water, I struggled to swim to the surface. But it was useless. Sarah Miller's hand tightened around my leg, pulling me deeper. I saw her pale face right before my eyes, her eyes still looking at me with sorrow. The black shadow with the grotesque tentacles glided closer, its cold tentacles touching my skin, tightening around my body. I felt excruciating pain and suffocation. I tried to scream, but only air bubbles escaped my mouth. Darkness completely enveloped me. I felt myself being pulled deeper and deeper, into a bottomless abyss. In my final moments, before consciousness completely faded, I saw Jedediah Thorne's face dimly appear beside Sarah Miller. His face was pale, his eyes empty, and a sinister smile stretched across his lips. Then, Everything faded into darkness and eternal silence. The next morning, Daniel Hayes's fishing rod was found lying on the shore of Silent Creek Lake. There was no trace of him. The log cabin remained silent, as if no one had ever lived there. Silent Creek Lake was still and serene, concealing terrifying secrets beneath its deep waters. Local residents still occasionally spoke of seeing a flickering flashlight by the lake at night, and hearing a faint call echoing from the water. But no one dared to approach Silent Creek Lake at night anymore. They knew that there are places where the night never truly ends, and the trapped souls forever seek their next victims in the eerie silence. Story 6. The Haunted Road. I'm Ethan Reed, 28 years old, a software engineer working for a tech company in suburban Salem, Oregon. I had just moved into an old rented apartment on the edge of town in late 2022. After breaking up with my long-term girlfriend, the breakup affected me quite a bit. I became more introverted and preferred to be alone. My job sometimes required me to work late, and the road home took me through an old, deserted forest, with no streetlights. My apartment was in an old apartment building built in the 1950s. With a musty smell and the creaking of decaying wood. I didn't know much about the building's history, only vaguely heard that it used to be an abandoned old hospital. In the first few nights after moving in, I often came home very late from work, around 1 to 2 a.m. The main road leading into town was quite busy, but I always chose a shortcut through the forest to save time. This road was narrow, winding, with tall, ancient trees on both sides obscuring the moonlight, making the air thick and colder than usual. There was only the sound of my car engine and the rustling of leaves in the trees. One night, as I was driving through a sharp bend, I heard a strange sound from the back of the car. A very faint clink, as if something had just hit the rear of the car. I startled, looking in the rearview mirror, but saw nothing. I thought it might have been a branch hitting the car. On subsequent nights, when I came home late from work, I heard similar sounds again. That clink became more frequent, sometimes accompanied by a faint scratching on the car's body. I tried stopping the car and checking, but found no traces. Besides the external sounds, when I got back to the apartment, I also started hearing small noises inside. Faint footsteps on the floor above me, even though I knew that apartment was vacant. A clinking from the kitchen, as if someone was moving things around. I frequently checked, but everything was in its original place. A feeling of being watched also began to creep in. When driving through the forest, I often felt as if someone was standing in the darkness, staring at my car. It was a spine-chilling, uncomfortable sensation, like an invisible gaze piercing through the car window. I frequently shone my headlights towards it, but only saw the black silhouettes of trees. Strange dreams also began to plague my sleep. I dreamt I was driving alone on the forest road late at night, and behind my car. There was always a dark shadow following. The shadow had no clear form, just a blurry mass. But I felt its terrifying presence. I often woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in cold sweat, with the feeling that something was still clinging to me. The initial signs had become more frightening, no longer just vague noises. One night, as I was driving through the narrow road in the forest, my headlights illuminated a shadow that flitted past very quickly on the roadside. It was a blurry, tall and thin figure, indeterminate gender, just a fleeting moment in the darkness, then disappearing deep into the forest. I startled, hitting the brakes hard. My heart pounded. I shone my headlights and handheld flashlight towards it, but saw nothing. I tried to reassure myself that it was just a wild animal. On subsequent nights, when I came home from work, I started hearing whispers in the wind as I drove through the forest. Faint, indistinct whispers, but with a mournful, eerie tone. It seemed to come from everywhere. From the trees, from the cold air around me. I often turned down the radio, trying to listen. But when I focused, the whispers disappeared. In the apartment, small objects began to shift inexplicably. The keys I left on the table would suddenly be on the floor. The book I was reading was flipped to another page. Sometimes, when I was alone, I felt the temperature in the room suddenly drop very low in certain spots, making me shiver. Once, as I was preparing coffee in the kitchen, I caught a terrifying reflection in the glass panel of the kitchen cabinet. A pale, distorted face, with deep black eyes staring at me. She had no expression, just an unnerving emptiness. I whirled around, but there was no one. When I looked back at the glass, the image was gone, leaving only my own frightened face. I tried to reassure myself that it was just a reflection of light. I began to feel genuinely worried. Stress from work and personal life had made me vulnerable, but what was happening was beyond anything I could explain. The tension continued to rise, the strange occurrences becoming more frequent and terrifying. One night, as I was driving home around 2 a.m., the forest road was eerily silent. Suddenly, I heard someone call my name, very clearly, echoing from the back seat of the car. Ethan. Ethan Reed. A female voice, thin, faint but full of sorrow and despair. I startled, almost losing control of the car. I looked in the rearview mirror, but saw no one. Only thick darkness behind. Immediately, a bone-chilling cold enveloped the entire car cabin. The temperature suddenly dropped very low, so much so that I could clearly see my breath pluming out. Even though I was driving, I felt as if someone was sitting right behind me, their cold breath on my neck. I pressed the gas, trying to drive as fast as I could through that terrifying road. But the calling name kept echoing, continuously, from behind. Ethan, why did you abandon me? I yelled. Get out, stay away from me. When I arrived at the apartment, everything inside was dark. I quickly opened the door and rushed inside, locking it securely. But the calling name still echoed in my head. Ethan, why? Objects in the apartment began to move more violently. The television automatically turned on with static, accompanied by disturbing buzzing sounds. The refrigerator door automatically opened completely. Strange noises emanating from inside. One night, I was sleeping, suddenly woke up to a bone-chilling sensation. I opened my eyes and saw a blurry female figure standing right next to my bed. She had long black hair, almost completely covering her face. Her eyes were two deep black holes. Staring at me, she said nothing, just extended her hand towards me. Her fingers long, skeletal, and cold. I screamed in horror, recoiling. When I blinked, the figure had vanished. I told a few friends, but they just thought I was severely stressed. I knew I couldn't endure this alone anymore. The prolonged despair and sleeplessness led me to decide to investigate the history of the forest road and the old apartment building. I believed there was a terrifying secret being hidden. I went to the city library and searched for old newspaper articles about the area. I found some disturbing information. In the 1970s, the forest road I often used was once a rarely used path, and a horrific murder had occurred there. A young woman named Emily Carter, 25 years old, was murdered and her body dumped in that forest. She was last seen walking home from a bar late at night. The killer was never caught. It was rumored that her spirit still lingered on that road, seeking justice. I also found information about my apartment building. It used to be an old psychiatric hospital built in the 1930s. Then abandoned in the late 1960s due to unexplained events and mysterious deaths of patients and staff. It was rumored that neglected patients and wronged spirits were still trapped in the building. This information sent shivers down my spine. The calling name, the shadow flitting across the road, the pale face in the mirror. It all seemed to relate to Emily Carter. But what about the phenomena in the apartment? Could Emily Carter's spirit have followed me home? I returned to the apartment. And with a newfound fear, I began searching for old traces. In a jammed drawer under the old wardrobe floor, I found an old necklace and a yellowed black and white photo. The photo showed a beautiful young girl with a sad smile. The back of the photo read, Emily, 1975. I shivered. This necklace and photo must have belonged to Emily Carter. Perhaps she dropped it when she was murdered, or the killer hid it here. And now, her spirit was haunting me. After finding Emily Carter's necklace and photo, my fear reached its peak. I knew that her spirit was seeking help or justice, and she had chosen me. The ghostly phenomena became extremely violent. In the apartment, furniture was violently thrown around, lights flickered wildly, then went out completely. Angry screams and direct threats echoed everywhere, accompanied by furious scratching sounds on the walls. One night, as I was trying to hide in the bedroom, I heard persistent knocking on the door. I knew it wasn't anyone normal. I stayed silent, holding my breath. The knocking stopped, but then the door was violently thrown open. A blast of cold air filled the room. I saw a blurry female figure, with long, disheveled hair, standing right in the doorway. It was Emily Carter. Her eyes were deep-set, full of pain and anger. She said nothing, just slowly extended her hand towards me. I screamed, bolted out of the apartment, ran frantically down the stairs, and out of the building. I ran towards the forest road, no longer thinking about safety. When I reached the middle of the forest road, it was pitch black. I heard my name being called, clearer than ever. Ethan, don't leave me. That voice was no longer faint, but became strong, full of despair and haunting. I turned back. Emily Carter stood there, in the middle of the road, under the faint moonlight. She wore an old, white dress, soaking wet and covered in mud. Her long black hair obscured her face, revealing only her deep-set eyes. Staring at me, she slowly moved towards me, each step making a faint clink. Like bones knocking together, I felt a bone-chilling coldness envelop me. I tried to back away, but my legs seemed frozen. Emily Carter extended her hand towards me, her fingers long, skeletal, and pale, trying to touch me. I felt excruciating pain as she touched my arm. I screamed, pouring all my remaining strength into the loudest scream of my life. What do you want from me? I don't know you. Get out. My scream seemed to shatter the air. Emily Carter froze. Her eyes looked at me with surprise, then with infinite sadness. A sigh escaped her, like a gentle breeze. Then, her figure slowly dissolved into the air, leaving behind a bone-chilling coldness and a pungent musty smell. The next morning, I left that apartment. I never dared to drive through that forest road again. I moved to a different city, further away, and found a new job. My life gradually returned to normal. But the haunting memory of Emily Carter still clings to me. I still frequently have nightmares about her calling my name. And the feeling of being watched. Every time I drive alone at night, especially through deserted roads, I feel a chill down my spine. The feeling as if Emily is still out there somewhere, lurking, waiting for someone to tell her story. I don't know exactly if Emily Carter wanted to harm me or just wanted me to help her find justice. I never got an answer. But I know one thing for sure. There are places where tragedy and pain are deeply buried, but their spirits still linger, seeking release, or seeking their next victim. I was lucky to escape, but that fear will forever be a part of me. That forest road, though it looks normal during the day, still holds its own terrifying secrets. If the story of the haunted road sent shivers down your spine, if you believe in true horror and hidden mysteries, please support our channel. Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next haunting stories, where we uncover the deepest fears. Thanks for listening.